Hello, everybody, and welcome as we're joining you live from Dallas, Texas. We're at the Landon HQ right now, my home office, which is where I intend to be from now until Sunday. NVTV, we're live on all of our platforms. That's YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. We've got an excellent show today, folks. CDL Dallas is happening this weekend, starting tomorrow, April 10th through the 12th for the CDL Dallas homestand. We're talking all things CDL Dallas, from the online mentality coming into the games to the predictions out of the games, who's surviving the group stage, who's winning the tournament, and what storylines can we expect to come out of it. All that and more ahead on Off the Break. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Off the Break, presented by Jack in the Box. I'm Lando Sanders. Sadly, we are not, again, at the beautiful Frontier Communications studio. I wish we were very much, but again, home studio, home office has to do for now. But I still think each and more every single day, I take a look at old pictures, old Instagram posts about how lovely the Frontier Communications studio is. But I know in due time, give it some time, we'll be back there momentarily, where things can kind of go back to the way they previously were. But at the very least, I want to give a huge and special thank you to the folks that are listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. If you haven't done so already, make sure to check out Off the Break on all podcast platforms in case you miss an episode, along with our folks that are listening to us a little bit later on. Also want to give a huge thank you to everybody that is tuning in with us today. Like I said, whether you find yourself on Twitch, on YouTube, even here on Twitter as well, I want to give a massive thank you to everybody who is tuning into the show, as we have a very, very interesting amount of things to cover, as CDL Dallas is right around the corner. In fact, it is starting tomorrow. And let me just say how excited I am to finally have the CDL back. Not many sports rather. I really had the luxury of starting up as early as we are here for Call of Duty, and I'm very excited for that. Now, I want to set the stage, right? Prepare the table, if you will, because I want to cover something that factors into all of my predictions. And I want this to factor rather into yours as well. The way I am judging predictions isn't strictly based on online connection, because does that have something to do with it? Of course it does, right? Of course it does. But I'm also judging predictions based on something that's come around recently, this term called online mentality. As much as I would love for this to not exist, it does. And it'd be foolish to not think that it does exist. The reason why online mentality exists is strictly because we are going from one level of competition to another, from LAN to online. Now, before I even move on, let me just say this. I absolutely realize why the league is transferring online. If you haven't listened to this show before, because there is no way the league exists otherwise. Legally, safety-wise, the league either doesn't exist or it exists online. So let me be clear. This is the best way that we can possibly do this. And from an outside looking in perspective, it really isn't all that bad, right? We have dedicated servers, which is awesome. But nonetheless, leaving the LAN environment and thinking that players, fans, etc., will act as if everything is back to normal is simply not the case, right? It's simply not the case whatsoever. I don't think the online to LAN move is rather as drastic as many think. Results, players over the 10-year history of Call of Duty tends to be pretty accurate, right? The results and the way that players are transferred up, the ability of calling players online players, I'm pretty sure ended in Advanced Warfare. And it tends to be pretty accurate on 12 hertz. So imagining it's going to be pretty more dedicated. That's not probably even a word. It's probably going to be even more dedicated now on dedicated servers. It's going to be more accurate now at a higher tick rate when it comes down to servers. Now, I'm not numb to the idea, and I 100% am sadly having to, but I'm taking every loss and every victory with a grain of salt, because Call of Duty is a fast game, right? At the highest level, and with how Modern Warfare works, with how Call of Duty works, the LAN to online difference occurs at many intervals, right? At many moments is that difference being recognized. At many moments is that signal difference being recognized. Where am I going with this? As happy as I am for the league to move forward, I am prepping myself for the future complaints and for the future excuses. I'm basing many future opinions on teams um, that have a good online mentality, because players are going to have to realize this is your form of competition now, right? It wasn't like old pro leagues when you have to rely on land coming up. Oh, we have this tournament coming up. Yeah, we have MLG Columbus right around the corner. No, it doesn't happen anymore. We don't know when the next land will be there. And there's no way for us to figure that out given the worldwide circumstances that we currently face. Dallas, in the first few online events, will test the mentality of all 12 teams in the Call of Duty League. It will test them, and it has the ability to elevate or break them. Fans of teams will do everything in their power to justify that if their team loses, it was because of X, it was because of Y, it was because of Z that my team lost. Teams, coaches, managers need to be prepared for not just modern warfare, but for online and mind warfare, because there will be problems at times, right? There will be teams that coast through, that have coasted through, and will continue to coast through the online league, not thinking that it's as important as it really is. We're better than this team. I'm better than this player. That gunfight would have never happened on land. Now, I'm sure some of that's true, but does it matter? No, it doesn't. It does not matter whatsoever. The online mentality does absolutely nothing positive. Now, you can realize that certain things would have happened differently, but the online mentality that many are going to have simply is inaccurate, because there is nothing that you can really start to compare it to. It'd be different if we are going hand in hand, side by side with online and land, saying, hey, well, these are the results online, these are the results on land. We're going to get a few weeks down the road here, folks, and we're going to have to look at online results as something that we have to hold on to. Whether or not we believe that maybe this team is starting to elevate or this team is starting to decline, that's the way you have to do it. And I want to address this because I think that it's very important to get this out of the way and to make this public, because after this is over, after this event of Dallas takes place, and there's probably going to be a few surprises here or there, maybe there's not, I hope there's not, but if there are, I want to make this aware, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen multiple times. And the reason why I bring this up is to not just prepare fans for this, but to make you aware of also the mental aspect that doesn't just now go in game anymore. It also is now out of game. I'm very, very interested to see how teams adapt to this, because while online does factor in, people have a way of bending online to their belief system, right? Online applies here, but it doesn't apply here. Be ready for it, right? But I am now judging teams based on how I think they handle the online aspect of CDL. It's one of the many featurettes, one of the many little details that I'm personally thinking about, and I recommend that you think about as well moving into predictions. Now, speaking of predictions, all right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of those. Let's go no further than good old Group A here at CDL Dallas. We've got the Florida Mutineers, Toronto Ultra, Dallas Empire, and the Los Angeles Guerrillas. I don't think this will come as much of a shock. One team that deserves the recognition of coming out of this group is the Dallas Empire, right? They are the most consistent team throughout the LAN League. They are the defending champions of CDL LA, and arguably, from many accounts, shouldn't get worse if maybe we are heading into now an online environment. By a lot of people's opinions, either positive or negative, they're assuming Dallas probably isn't going to get worse, right? I think by a lot of people's opinions, including my own, I don't think they get worse, right? I'm not saying they're going to get a lot better, but I don't think they get worse. I think it'd be foolish to think that they get worse based on a lot of different things. So let's be realistic here. Who's making it out with them, right? Who's making it out of this group? Because somewhere unexpectedly, Dallas should get out of this one, right? I expect to see Dallas. I think most people expect to be Dallas. I'd be surprised if you didn't. So who makes it out of the second seed alongside the Dallas Empire? Well, that's interesting, right? Because you have three teams that all have a case to be made. And all teams have recently made a roster change, have recently made a roster move. And I believe that this fight for second will actually be a pretty close one. I think this will be actually a pretty close race for second. Now, let's go ahead and cover the rosters that were, or rather the roster moves, rather, that were in fact made. As seen in LA, Florida now does have Faro in the starting lineup moving forward for Prestini. LAG, as seen in LA, recently off the back of a total facelift, right, are now rocking still with Blast, Spart, and Vivid. Toronto, newest one, in fact, did make another roster swap, bringing out Looney and putting in Metals. Just because they made so many moves, I'll go and list off their entire team. Again, it will be Cammy, Bance, Classic, Methods, and Metals. Did get that confirmed by someone who is close to the team, just in case. I know there was a few people asking, like, hey, what is the team? What exactly is this one looking like? So there you kind of go. That's the way that it's looking right now for the Ultra. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with the Mutineers here. Where do we think this team stands right now? Right, I like the decision of bringing in Faro from a talent perspective, right? He can run an AR. He can do work with the SMG. I think Florida bringing him in was, from a slang perspective, a very, very good decision, right? From what the players have said, his energy is infectious. He's bringing great comms to the team. And I think he's very grateful to be where he is right now, right? The talk amongst Faro for the longest time has been on his ability to be handled in game, in terms of the communications, in terms of maybe even the out of game type stuff. And I still think that does exist, but at least for now, I think he's just happy to be where he is and wants to ignite his current team in what could be considered in some ways of a honeymoon stage. And I don't mind this whatsoever, because the first thing that you want to do is try to prove to yourself, this team, or rather to this team that you're on, hey, I deserve to be here. And I think he's still in that frame of mind, which I like. Do I like Florida? I do like this team. I do. I do feel like they are not a bad roster by any means. And I know I've talked a lot as well about flex players kind of getting the go of it in Modern Warfare. We talked about Rated from the London Royal Ravens. We talked about Zero from the Subliners, right? They've kind of gotten a lot of difficulty. And the same thing kind of has happened with Mox, right, of Florida. Something has to work out with him, right? Something needs to be toned up a little bit with Mox. We need to see something take place to where Mox no longer is really all that relied upon, unless he wants to change roles, because we've seen enough to the point where it's just not functioning as intended. Florida does not have enough consistent respawn slang, at least up to this point. Not enough consistent respawn slang to keep up with some of the top dogs. Can they have their runs? Sure, right? It's going to happen at times. But unless we see Frosty and Faro really start to be the guys that you can rely on for 1+ KDs, I don't think it can really happen for them. I don't. I don't think this is really going to happen for them. This team is still new. This is their first real event with having practice in Faro. But I think they need to figure out something with Mox. And the lack of veteran leadership, I think, will start to hurt this team as the season progresses. But at least for now, something needs to happen with this group. Now, talking on Toronto, not really a fan favorite by many in the scene. And the reason for that really is because they're constantly changing up their roster. Right? When the team formed, they had a specific roster in mind. That changed leading into launch weekend. Launch weekend ends, they changed their roster coming into London. London and Atlanta happened, and now they're changing their roster again, leading up into Dallas. This is an organization that I've been told isn't a stable one. Players are frustrated. Management is frustrated. It doesn't seem like a healthy ecosystem right now. And you know what? That affects your players, right? They hear things. They read things in headlines. Management is there to set their mind at ease rather that make them feel worried. And I'm not saying it's directly anyone in particular. I'm just saying in general, they read the things that are going on. They see the firing that's taking place in the Toronto, or rather, whatever you want to kind of call it. But we'll just say Toronto. I think that's kind of a blanket term. They see what's kind of going on with the organization. As much as I understand what the Ultra is trying to do with this 10-man lineup, it's not working, right? It's not a healthy strategy anymore. I get that if a roster doesn't work, change it. But you aren't giving it time to breathe, right? They haven't gone for more than 2 events without making a move. And you start to turn these roster changes into what I would imagine is a very intense environment. Call of Duty is a role-based game, right? Meaning that sometimes a player may do worse than another despite having better stats. When they moved away from medals, it was said that it was for communication problems. He was the best player on the team the first event took place. And I watched scrimmages, and I can understand him just fine. Right now, they're getting rid of Looney, the second questionable move in my eyes that's taking place, which pace-wise, he has been slower, but the guy is the leader, right? This is the guy that I said at the start of the year is the glue for the Toronto Ultra. If they wanted to use Lucky, if they wanted to use medals, he is the veteran on this team that can help bring everybody together because he's done it in the past. He has won championships by being the leader in the past. Toronto, they need to invest in Looney, and now we are where we are. We're coming into an online environment where we just talked about it. Mentality is everything, and they take away the guy that possibly, and what I'm imagining, is the guy to provide them with that mentality, the guy to be the leader. Now, they may actually play better without him, right? Because there are certain rosters that just do that, right? They make a questionable move, but in some cases it was for the right reasons. But for the long haul, this is a team that doesn't have an identity, right? And this is a group of players that are all aware that at any point they could be replaced, right? This is a team that always conscious of it. And I've been told by sources, it's a very real possibility they make another move if they don't perform well in Toronto. I've been told that. Saying, hey, there's pretty much players ready to go if this team doesn't perform well here. And I worry about this team. And I don't know where to judge where they're at right now. Most people don't even know what their team is, for God's sake. And we've never even seen these guys play, at least outside of scrimmages. There's a lot of questions around the Ultra right now. And lastly, the Los Angeles Guerrillas, a team that did take a risk. Okay? We're getting that out in the open. I get the young player point of view on how young players have worked in the past. But many people at times said, this is a team that's got some good pieces on it, right? This is a team that can slay despite the in-game problems that this roster could face. You know, they've got this guy, they've got this guy, they've got this guy. It was a risk, right? From a financial perspective, especially, you do put yourself in somewhat of a risky place because who knows what happens if this team bottoms out and the players that you already replaced aren't interested in coming back, right? That happens in Call of Duty. As odd as it may sound to say, hey, you know, player gets moved to the bench, that player doesn't want to come off the bench anymore. That happens. It's early in Call of Duty, and I'm not giving it a pass, but it does happen pretty frequently. Players get replaced, not interested in wanting to come back anymore. This move was a risk for the amount of players you replaced and the question marks you had, but I think it will work out better than intended for them. I've liked what I've seen in scrims. Keeping in mind, this is a team that was up 2-0 versus Optic in LA. Granted, did OG throw away the first 2 maps? Yeah, they did. They absolutely did. They choked away the first 2 maps. But they did take those versus a hot Optic roster. This team goes from one of the oldest to one of the youngest. Their average player age decreased by 3 years, which is massive in Call of Duty. This is a team that is now, though, in their element. Arguably, the Guerrillas benefit more from going to online than many other teams. This is a young group that just came together and that just came from being strictly online. You know, still trying to find their identity together. I think they have a solid coaching staff, and I think this is a team that wants to go fast. It's almost like the secondary version of the Atlanta phase, right? And obviously, Aqua plays way faster than Major Maniac, but you kind of get the point, right? To a certain extent, this is a group that wants to play quick, and that's very similar to mimicking a team like the Atlanta phase. I was impressed at the way they played Paris in the online exhibition the other day. But I think they beat them 3-1 and only playing respawns. I think the only map that they lost, and I could no, okay, that's the only map that they did lose was Gunrunner Domination, which is by far the best map slash mode combination the Legion have had all year. And I think we've seen the additions improve a lot in the little bit of time that we've got to watch them on. And I'm really watching out for Vivid, especially. He was the 6th player on my list in players to watch heading into the league, the online league, that is. Extremely talented. He likes to play fast. And so far in LA, he was the fastest player in the CDL, which is pretty informative. If this team can work around that pace, even from the AR department, I think not only he, but LAG sees more success. But watch out for Vivid and watch out for Aqua. Aqua's secretly been one of the best main ARs this season, but hasn't really been highlighted all that much, probably due to the lack of results that LAG have had. All right. So out of these 3 teams, kind of give a brief synopsis on where they sit, at least as of right now. Who do we see making it out of this group alongside Dallas? Now, to put in perspective, Toronto and Florida will play each other first, followed by LAG facing off against Dallas. I think Toronto may actually come away with the victory over Florida. Reason being, for the past 2 events, the Mutineers have lost their first series. I think that trend has the ability to continue, as Toronto may come out with a few surprises. Despite the way that Toronto currently sits in the league, they're actually a team that generally plays Call of Duty right. Like it's not as if they have a problem with kind of making the right rotations or doing the right things. It's often just kind of in certain moments where they start to falter, maybe from a slang or talent perspective, but they play the game right. So I would say kind of from that point of view, that's kind of where I see it, at least for now. But I think in terms of kind of for the future, now I know I talked pretty low on Toronto earlier, and I still do. I just think they've got some firepower. I think they're sneaky when it comes down to hardpoint, and they could rely on a search and destroy here and there. That's a team that used to rely on S&D. So based on all of these results, right, who I have falling in the bracket, I have got the Los Angeles Guerrillas making it out. I think it'll be an interesting series versus Florida, but I think if LAG can lock up hardpoints versus Florida, push them in the S&D, and remain consistent versus Toronto, outmatch them with pace, they should be in a good spot to come away with this. I understand Florida, it's a solid pick. It really is. It's not a bad choice whatsoever. I would not be surprised by any means. If we did see the Mutineers come away with this, I just like the way that LAG have played. I like the way that I saw them play in the online exhibition. I think this is a team that feels more comfortable than they've ever felt when it comes down to the CDL. I think this is a team that's at home, and I think they're pretty motivated when it comes down to the future. They've looked, like I said, better and better in online scrims. And I think kind of given these guys history, they're going to thrive in this perspective. And I think in Search and Destroy, this should be a team that is not one to reckon with. That's for sure. So which teams do I think make it out of Group A along with Dallas? I think it'll be the Guerrillas, but I think it will be a close matchup between all 3 of these teams, and I would not be surprised if Toronto plays both of these rosters pretty close in certain maps. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Now, one of the biggest stories for me coming into CDL Dallas and this online environment was everyone's favorite word, pressure. Right? Everyone wanted to know, who is the most pressure team coming into the CDL, right? Is it the Dallas Empire? Is it the Atlanta FaZe? Is it the LA Optic? I don't think it's any one of those, right? Pressure, Dallas. What do they have to be nervous about? Right? What pressure does the most consistent LAN team and tournament champion really have? Right? What kind of pressure does the best team in the CDL have in Atlanta FaZe? Right? A team that has lost 1 series on LAN this year, and a team that went on an insane streak before launch weekend even took place. It's hard to generate a lot on OGLA right now because they're currently out of the question in terms of, what their roster is, but OGLA lost a lot of their pressure after they beat the Guerrillas, right? The only team that's yet to win a series, the pressure of being the only team that's yet to do that. And especially after they 3-0 the Rocker, I feel like the pressure was over for them. Right? I think for them, it was time to finally get to work. The pressure is off. Let's go ahead and dive in. I don't think that's the case anymore for these guys. I don't think the pressure is really at all is on the teams that are currently doing well or the teams that are expected to do well. It's on the teams that have questions on them right now. Right? Those two top teams for me were the Paris Legion and primarily the Seattle Surge. Paris still with high expectations, right? They're currently a top 5 team in the standings, but since launch weekend have only beaten Toronto and New York, the current 10th and 12th worst team in the league, 10th and 12th place currently in the CDL. They've had some solid series versus Chicago. They've taken a few maps off of Minnesota in their duels. But where do you rank them? Or where do you rank this team right now? Does this team, for me at least, this is the big thing that I'm worried about, does this team's pace improve? Can they continue to live up to the expectations that were set for them at the start of the year after launch weekend? It's going to be hard in this group to do that because they're currently 0-3 collectively versus Chicago and Minnesota. We're going to need to see some improvements, again, like I said, in their pace and their ability to work together and in unison throughout the map. They have some of the biggest hardpoint engagement per minute gaps between a full team and an SMG Slayer, and even between SMG Slayers. And I mentioned this last week. The average hardpoint engagement per minute player sits right around 5. Right? I know that the number, the engagements per minute, what exactly does that mean? Pretty much the amount of engagements that you see per minute in hardpoint. The average happens to be around a 5. Kismet in a hardpoint game averages around a 5.4. Well, what does that mean? Right? What exactly is that impressive? Is that good? It just so happens to be top 5 in the CDL, right? He's playing alongside guys like Dylan and guys like we mentioned earlier, like Vivid, Zuma, playing at that pace, right? He's top 5 in the CDL. The rest of the team averages out in terms of Paris, outside of Kismet, rest of the team, 4.59, which is 0.41 less than the average player. Well, Landon, that's probably because you're including Dens, right? He's a slow AR player. He's one of the slower main ARs in the game. It's probably just because of him. Really? Because with Dens, the team actually averages a 4.59. Without Dens, they average a 4.57. Dens, in terms of engagements, is second on the team when it comes to hardpoint. And for an AR to be second isn't really all that uncommon. But when you look at other players in the top 5 of engagements per minute, we're talking about everybody in the CDL, the other top 5 players in engagements per minute, the next highest player on their team isn't far behind. In fact, of the other 4 players listed, and I'm not including Zuma because he's about to have Mac Melts, but if you're looking at the other 4 players outside of Kismet on the scoreboard of engagements per minute, the lowest teammate that player in the top 5 has is 19th, with Scraps from London alongside Dylan, who currently sits in second. So like I said, get all 5 players. You look at their teammate, the lowest out of all 4 of those is Dylan, or rather it's Dylan's teammate Scraps, who currently sits in 19th place. Just keep in mind, the 19th, that is the important thing to think about. 19th place for second. So for Kismet, right, we mentioned the other 4. For Kismet, the next fastest player on his team in terms of all the players is Dens, who sits at 49th. The other 4 players who are on that list, the next guy who is in line right behind them, the average pace is at 19th. The other for Kismet is 49th. Paris have got to fix what I'm seeing is a pacing issue. That's one of the biggest things for them, I think, coming in to Dallas, is how is this going to work for them? Right? How are they going to improve on the faults that they've seen, considering the recent results that they've had really haven't been all that fantastic. Now, looking towards Seattle, this is a team that had pressure. Why? Because ahead of the season, many people had listed them as a top 5 team. Some people listed them as a top 2 team, and it wasn't all that shocking. I know it's going to take a little bit of the racking of the brain to figure out that took place, but it's true. Many people had the Seattle Surge as a top 2 or top 5 team in the league. This is a team that has been and is still full of expectations, and they've yet to live up to it. They've yet to live up to the expectations that were set for them at the start of the season. And we all know what exists in terms of these players' careers. Pressure has been Seattle's middle name, right? How have they lost a majority of their series this season? Round 11s, last second hardpoint rotations, losing major leads. It's been Seattle all year long. This is a team that is yet to live up to the expectations. And I think for them, the clock is ticking. I don't think players are happy with how things are going. And I think they want change. Yet we haven't seen anything be done outside of Pander being brought in for Enable, which I don't think was enough of a move. I'm not saying it was a bad move. I'm saying I don't think it was enough of a move. I worry for Seattle that this will be another disappointing group stage for them because they have to deal with either Minnesota or Chicago. Granted, they've yet to face off against Chicago, and they currently sit 0-2 versus Minnesota. The most worrisome part about Seattle is, let's say they stay alive, right, and take on Minnesota to get out of the group, and losers, right, to get out of the group and losers out of this particular stage. Well, that exact same scenario just took place in Atlanta. To get out of the groups, Minnesota managed to 3-0 Seattle just a series before, and they beat them 3-1. So they went 3-0 and 3-1. Seattle only managed in 2 series to win 1 map. That map being in Search and Destroy, and what else other than a round 11? Something to also consider, and this is something that I'm actually very happy about, is actually Apathy, right? He just had a child. Awesome, right? I was informed that he will, in fact, be playing this weekend. And could that be taking away from scrimmaging, right? Could that be taking away from some scrimmaging? Because that probably should, right? I'd very much expect for that to be taking away from the practice leading into event. And that's nothing on Apathy, right? Because that should be taking his time away. That's most important, and he should have that time. But Seattle may not all be there. And from a team that currently is hurting and could really use the CDL points, if they go 0-2 this weekend, they will go down to 11th in the standings, most likely. If my predictions were to rain out the way that I think that they will go to 11th in the standings. A group of veterans, 5 world champions, a guy in Karma who's considered the GOAT. This team in 11th place. So which team stands the best chance, right? Can either of these teams survive the group stage? Because I'll be honest, it's going to take a lot of convincing for me to think otherwise, that Paris and Seattle, who have a combined 0-5 record versus Chicago, Minnesota collectively, really stand a chance. I mean, seriously, I think as it stands, all in all, Seattle may have a burst here or there, but a team that I think stands the best chance is Paris. And I think that they have to be at their very best, though, to actually make something happen. Again, it wouldn't surprise me because I think this series between Seattle and Paris will actually be somewhat close if we're talking about Seattle. But I think the best chance to just make it out of this group, not even talking about these two facing off against each other, but overall to get out of this group, I think that team is Paris. Because these are two teams that aren't great at S&D, right? If Paris gets a gunrunner Dom, I'd probably give it to Paris that they take it over Seattle. But every other map, I think I give to Seattle when it comes to domination. So if these two are facing off against each other to get a good start in this group, I'm looking at Hardpoint to be the swing game mode. Because I think Paris takes the S&D. I think Seattle takes the Dom unless it's gunrunner. Right? I just don't see it happening. I really don't. I don't think that this is really capable for either of these teams to really make a lot of noise when it comes down to it. I think it's going to be, as much as I want to say, oh yes, there's a chance, right? There's a possibility. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to try to derive a whole lot from either of these teams. And for those who are, joining us currently online, if you're watching this a little bit later, feel free. Let me know here on any of our chats or even on Twitter as well. Thoughts when it comes down to either of these teams, their possibility to come out of this group, their abilities to possibly make that happen. But regardless, I just don't see it really proving any fruit. I don't see it really making any actual chance of them getting through this. But one thing I am considering about this group overall is Minnesota being online, right? They're kind of spread out throughout the country. They're all at home. I know online isn't at all where they really want to be. But the way that I look at that is innocent until proven guilty. Right? I give Minnesota the nod unless something tells me otherwise. All right, let's go and discuss this, right? Who's winning this title? Right? Who's winning this guy, right? I mean, who really is expected and will win the first online event? Because I'm only looking at 3 teams, that being the Minnesota Rocker, Chicago Huntsmen, and Dallas Empire. Now, for Minnesota, this is a team that's looked great versus the Atlanta Phase, right? They're currently 1-1. They managed to take them down at the most recent event. A roster that's been very consistent throughout the league. They're no question a top 4 team in the world. They managed to play Dallas extremely close in the LA Grand Finals, losing 3-2, and look even better and more solid in every series that we watch from them. Next for Chicago, they're the CDL London champions, right? They do have a decent slip up in Atlanta where they go game 5, round 11 versus Toronto. They lose a bad game 1 versus Minnesota and get reverse swept later by the Mutineers. They're trying out a new role with Arcides as the main AR. Is this a team that looks better come time for CDL Dallas? Lastly, for the Empire. First off, they're the current CDL defending champions, right? They take down Minnesota in the grand finals of the event. This is a team that gained a ton of confidence, especially for their young guys and Ilian Shotzi proving themselves, Hook proving to himself that he can win. They're now in an online environment. They have a chance to have more confidence now online, especially now that they have a championship. So, I mean, who's expected to win this, right? Whose event is this to take? I think it has to be Chicago. I get it, right? They lost in Atlanta, and it wasn't great, right? Were they technically 1 map away from the grand final? Sure. But the way they looked, it wouldn't have even been pretty, right? It wouldn't have been a pretty grand final if the Huntsmen managed to make it through. But let's be real here. Chicago also holds a 4-0 series record versus Dallas and Minnesota collectively. They hold a 3-0 record versus Dallas specifically. The Empire have looked better pretty much every time, but in that same mentality, innocent until proven guilty. Chicago hasn't done anything to make me think that they are guilty yet. This event is Chicago's to take. Also, based on my bracket, if Chicago does manage to escape in the first seed and Dallas as well manages to get out in the first seed, in this situation, Chicago, in my bracket personally, has to face off against who to make it to the grand finals? The LA Gorillas. And I'm kind of cool with making that prediction. I'm pretty happy with that one in terms of whoever it is. If it's the Florida Mutineers, if it's the Toronto, that's the team they have to face off against in order to make it to the finals. As long as Dallas doesn't mess up in groups, Chicago should have an easy ride once the group stage is over. Now, in terms of my predictions, right, we know this is by definition Chicago's event to take, right? This is historically based on the way the records work versus each other. This is the Huntsmen. This is their event to win. Now, in terms of my predictions, in order to make it to the finals, Dallas and Minnesota will have to play each other in round 1 of the bracket stage. Again, this was the LA Grand Final, and I think that Dallas should have closed it out earlier. I think they have more confidence in themselves. I think Ilian Shotzi will look even better online, especially Illy. For those reasons, and leading into the finals, I have Dallas and Chicago in the grand finals. I like Minnesota. However, considering the online aspect, when I got a chance to talk to Goddard X, his biggest thing was, hey, online, it's not the greatest for us. Sometimes Alex gets frustrated. We're all across, the United States right now. Silly's back in Las Vegas. I think Goddard X told me he's back in Maryland. Everybody's pretty much spread out. Online is not a strong suit for the Rocker, at least based on what we have seen. Now, can they improve? I think it's very much a chance of that, especially with dedicated servers. But at least for right now, still being very cautious of that. Now, I think that this grand final, though, getting back to Dallas versus Chicago, I think this has the ability to be closer than most people think it does because there's a lot of people who don't remember how close these maps have actually been between the two. They solely just remember the fact that the Chicago Huntsmen are currently 3-0 versus the Dallas Empire. But you have to consider a few things, right? Chicago is trying out a role change with Arcides on the main AR. Could they change that back? Absolutely. But still, nonetheless, they are trying things out and they're trying to keep things fresh, which I'm actually very interested in other teams to try this out, especially if one of the top dogs is doing so. I think if we're talking specifically on the final, Dallas has the fire out and win the hard point. I think they have to come out of the gates hot. They do historically take the S&D and then they have the game 5 in the cards. So that's the way that I think this series has to go for them. If they do meet up in the grand finals, I think in this particular example, Dallas needs to win the first hard point. And historically, they have a great history in walking away with the game 2 S&D. And now they're thinking about, hey, we've got that game 5 at the least that we can rely on, right? We have that particular game mode that we're familiar with. We've been in a lot of game 5s. In terms of Chicago, haven't really been in a whole lot of those. There haven't been a whole lot of situations where they had to win the S&D. There have been times where Chicago's looked great in Search and Destroy, and there have been times where they haven't looked great in Search and Destroy. It really is kind of a toss-up for me, at least for them right now. But you can't just look away from the 0-3 series record. I know I just brought it up, but you can't forget it, right? It's realistic. It has happened. It has taken place when these teams have met up with each other. It's happened 3 times, and 3 times prior, it has gone one way. As much as I want to try and be different and explain why I think that there is a huge chance that Dallas can walk away with this, because I think there really is. There's a very good chance in their predictions to take down the Huntsmen. But I'm not going to try and be different here. I'm going to go off of what I expect to take place, which is that the Chicago Huntsmen do it again. I'm saying Chicago, keeping in mind that I wouldn't be angry thinking Dallas here. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't mind if people started to put the Empire above Chicago in this example, considering the fact that it is the first online event, considering the fact that Dallas is all in one location for the most part. And the fact that in some cases, the Chicago Huntsmen, I think formals in LA, things like that, you have to consider those things, or rather in California, excuse me. But for the most part, those are things you have to consider. I am very interested to see exactly how a lot of these maps go. And I'm very interested as well to hear everybody's thoughts when it comes down to predictions. If you haven't done so already, feel free to let us know in chat. Feel free to let us know when it comes down to Twitter as well. Tweet at me at Lando your thoughts on the grand finals. Who's going to walk away with it? Because it should be a very interesting event to watch. Now, I know this has kind of been, in terms of this show, it has been kind of more focused in on trying to talk about teams specifically rather than kind of talking about subjects overall, which I like to do a little bit of a mixture of both. But because of how important this event is, not just for teams, but also for the CDL as a whole, I really wanted to focus on these matchups because there's a lot of people who have kind of started in some ways to forget about what has taken place not long ago in terms of the way that matches have looked, in terms of the way that we've had a little bit of a break from the CDL. So I really kind of wanted to dive in deep when it came down to these matchups. As well, I know I mentioned my Twitter a little bit earlier, going to be trying to post a full bracket example of my predictions on there. Would love to see everybody's response to that. But really in general, I think we had a fantastic show today. We covered a lot of very interesting subjects, right? We talked about the online mentality for the future of online competition, the way that that is going to factor in, the way that I think that it's going to be important for the future. Possible Group A survivors, along with the Dallas Empire. Which of those 3 young rosters has the ability to make it through, considering the roster changes that have taken place? And whether or not Seattle and Paris can make a run. Is it realistic? Do they have the ability to get out of what is a very, very stacked pool? And along with that, who is expected to win CDL Dallas? I gave my predictions. I think it's the Chicago Huntsmen. I'm not angry at a Dallas Empire pick by any means. I think it's going to be close. I think it has the ability to go to a game 5. But I want to give a huge thank you again to all of our listeners on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, etc., as well to everybody who is watching us live tonight. You can feel free to catch Off the Break every Tuesday and Thursday. That's at 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to watch the Call of Duty League as it returns now to the online world tomorrow. That's Friday, April 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you Tuesday.